last year, I was drinking these exotic teas every day before a show and
All
after
right,
a
I
show.
just got back from
Drinking
work
these motherfucking $100 a cup. Put the
and
honey in it.
I saw
My friend was
something
like,
that
I
was
got some special honey I'm gonna
interesting.
send you. And I was like, yes. And I
We're
got
gonna
the
check it
special
out
honey.
after
I
this
start
little
putting it in the
comedy
tea.
skit
And
by
I'm
Cat
feeling
Williams.
stronger and stronger and shit. I'm not knowing what the fuck is happening. I found out this nigga done sent me dick hard honey. I didn't know. I thought the Lord was really answering my prayers. He has rejuvenated and restored me. I'm lucky because I don't have to fight by myself. I got a God that loves me. Like he take care of me. Because he know I'm slow. So he treat me like I'm slow. He just be blessing me out of nowhere. And it be real miracles. I found out from traveling all across this great nation, a lot of people do some great motherfucking work. They don't get no credit. This whole country is built on the backs of farmers. That's who run the fucking country.
Oh man, so yeah, I just got off of work. I saw a clip as I was just browsing through YouTube to see what was going on, and someone is posted a news story on Jeffrey Epstein's brother. So we're gonna look at this, and I heard that some people are taking his brother's snapshot and proclaiming Jeffrey Epstein is alive. Which, come on. So yeah, let's peep this out, see what's going on.
7 years since your brother was found unresponsive in his prison cell, and you remain convinced he did not take his own life. Why do you say that?
Well, first, let me be clear. When I first heard that Jeffrey was found dead from the parents' suicide, I had no reason to doubt that. I fully accepted that he committed suicide.
Yo, okay. I am so glad he goes straight into this because I believe it was my first video on Jeffrey Epstein's first release interview with Steve Bannon. We all saw in my video, he grabbed his neck, referencing when I think like this bank that he invested in had went under and bankrupt, and this police officer was asking him about what about his investments with that bank. He said, "Oh," grabbed his neck. I specifically said most people who do self-inflicting gestures that resembles death and suicide, they're already suicidal or been contemplating suicidal whenever a large situation occurs in their life that causes them loss. Keep that in mind. He already said it. He already assumed or knew he committed suicide. So there's your evidence right there. Most likely, allegedly, Jeffrey Epstein was planning on committing suicide once he was in jail so he would not have to testify. Because in the last video, I believe it was the trial in 2010, he was scripted to not testify to any questions that attorney was asking him. So I'm glad he brought that up.
I thought that he was potentially facing a long time in jail.
See,
I know he wouldn't want to
see,
live that
see,
way in
see.
jail as a convicted pedophile.
We are running this back. This is
I
on
fully
point.
accepted that he
This is seriously on point. Let's run that back. Let's listen to it very carefully. And I was just hinting on that. So that backs up my basis in my theory that he didn't want to be in there. And his brother is saying he didn't want to be in jail, but I guarantee you he didn't want to go through all that testifying again.
be clear. When I first heard that Jeffrey was found dead from the parents' suicide, I had no reason to doubt that. I fully accepted that he committed suicide. I thought that he was potentially facing a long time in jail. I know he wouldn't want to live that way in jail as a convicted pedophile. He had no children to worry about. Our parents were gone. He was single. So I just assumed he decided to take himself out. And I
More, I mean, do we have to keep going? Like, realistically, this debunks the conspiracy theory. This debunks it. Now, let's keep going.
sort of respected that. But then the next day, I had to come back to New York to identify his body, and I did. So he is dead. and they did an autopsy. And the two pathologists that were there, which was Dr. Kristen Roman, who is the city pathologist who was charged with doing the autopsy, and Dr. Michael Barden, who we had there, we being me and the estate, had him there just as a precaution. They came out of the autopsy and they both concurred that this looked more like a homicide than a suicide. So they wouldn't call it a suicide. And on the initial death certificate, which we had to get that day in order to claim his remains, under cause of death, it said pending further study. So then you start wondering, well, what's going on here? You know, the two very highly qualified pathologists are saying this looks like a homicide. And that does not appear in the Justice Department reports. They neglect to mention that.
Wow.
And then a few days later, the chief medical
Wow.
examiner, Barbara Sampson, she calls it a suicide. Now, let me be clear, Barbara Sampson never saw Jeffrey's body. She wasn't at the office that day when they did the autopsy. So we don't know what she's basing her opinion on. Now, I've spoken to many pathologists, and they all basically agree that when an initial death certificate says pending further study, it usually takes weeks or longer to get a determination because there's going to be some kind of an investigation. They're going to study it further. But that doesn't appear to have been done here.
Right.
And then Bill Barr, the
What?
Attorney General of the United States at the time, came out with a ridiculous statement saying that he personally saw the videotape from outside of the tier, through that night, and he saw that nobody went in or out of the tier, and that convinced him it was a suicide. When I heard that, I knew that this was some sort of cover-up for a couple of reasons. First of all, when he said that, it makes you believe or makes you think that he can actually see the door to the tier in the videotape. Okay? Now, with the recent release of the videotapes, you see you cannot see the door to the tier, and it's been shown that somebody could easily get to that tier and leave from that tier without being caught from that camera. So just what was Bill Barr talking about? Also, we've
Now, I said also, if Jeffrey Epstein wanted to commit suicide like his brother was hinting on, and he didn't know how to do it himself, someone could have helped him. Someone could, and to be honest, perhaps if no one helped him, someone probably was standing at, let's just say someone went into the room. Someone could have been watching the door while Jeffrey Epstein could have rigged something to commit suicide. But at the end of the day, whatever happened, yes, I would say it would be a cover-up because I felt, because I also said earlier, usually when people are in jail, if they die, usually someone kills them or someone helps them end up in a suicidal situation. But there's going to be people around. Chances are, realistically. So there's a chance if they do not want to put a name out, they are, sorry about the interruption, they're going to try to cover up for the person who was involved or who had knowledge of the suicide. But chances are, regardless of the investigation that probably was not finished, Jeffrey Epstein probably wanted to die. Because like his brother said, he probably didn't want to stay in jail. He probably didn't want to go through the rigorous interrogations anymore. None of that. None of that. So, let's continue to hear what he has to say.
seen the orange blur or something going up the steps towards the tier, during the night. So again, what was Bill Barr referring to? And the other part that made me realize this was a cover-up was because he completely neglected the possibility that there was another inmate on the tier already that could have harmed somebody and
See?
who would
Yep,
not
see?
have to go and come from the tier. So for the top law enforcement official of the United States to neglect the possibility that Jeffrey was killed by somebody already on the tier doesn't pass the laugh test. Now, since Bill Barr's testimony is worthless because it's based on nonsense, and Barbara Sampson's conclusion is also based on thin air, well, that's why they're calling it a suicide. based on those two determinations. Also, by calling it a suicide early, it stops any investigation. Because if it's truly a suicide, there's really nothing to investigate. Because in a
I,
suicide,
I agree with him, but at the same time, Jeffrey Epstein, let's just say there was an inmate involved. Jeffrey Epstein could have been talking to somebody to at least help him commit it or at least watch the door. Because if the guards find out or if someone or another inmate sees you committing suicide, they're going to say something. They're going to, blow you out. It's going to be yelled out. They're going to stop you. Because one thing about inmates, you may hear about the fight on on the inside and all the grouping and clicking out. Generally, they're going to make sure you stay alive because 80% of inmates generally want to see you make it through and get out. Now, if you make enemies in there, yeah, they'll find a way to kill you or, fight you. But overall, they're going to click up in there and try to help each other get through that. And he was in a federal prison, so I'm pretty sure he had no enemies. I'm pretty sure, despite his background, they were probably going to try to see him through, because everybody in there for a reason. Everybody tries to take accountability while they're in jail, federal prison, whatever you want to call it. So at the end of the day, my theory is he wanted to commit suicide, and he probably had help. Most likely he had help. And that's why it's a major cover-up. And even if they did help him, they probably helped him get ways to do it, or they was watching out for him so they can do it. And most likely, the inmate probably also had protection. And maybe Epstein probably asked somebody to protect the inmate. Who knows? We don't even know. But they don't want to drop no names. That's obvious. Because whoever is or was involved, most likely Jeffrey Epstein probably knew somebody who knew somebody to respect the fact they needed that person protected. And there's a lot of angles. Now, why the DOJ is involved in all that, as far as a possible cover-up, perhaps he knew people that worked in the DOJ at that time and probably asked for it to be done, and they don't want their names to be dropped. They don't, they don't want to be exposed that they were involved. Just like there's a possibility in one of my last clips that the government or people in the prior government positions were also involved in the activities of trafficking with Epstein. And that's why Trump originally said he was going to release the files, but he took his time, he had it redacted, and then when he did, the first thing he does is he targets the Democrats as a distraction to cover up the other politicians and people, musicians and businessmen who are involved along with himself. So, he has a funny way of detracting to deflect the truth. And the Democrats are scapegoats to him, especially if they are always against his ideals and policies.
right, there are two questions. It's how and why. And the how is usually pretty obvious when you come across a suicide victim. If they're hanging from something, well, they hung themselves. If they're laying in a pool of blood with a gun next to them, they shot themselves. If they're splattered on the sidewalk, they jumped from the building. There's really very little mystery in a suicide. So they decided to call this a suicide and close the case. And all the other investigation they've been doing is about the errors that went wrong in the prison, the guards didn't fill out the paperwork, and that kind of nonsense. Nothing about a potential.
So that clears up the guard involvement situation. So chances are Epstein had people who was in communication with him throughout that whole period, and they probably all staged the thing. I bet they all were involved to stage it, and they probably had an inmate to help. And now they have to cover it up because, like I said, if you watch my first video on the very first interview that was released, he actually gestured strangulation, literally. And his brother just said he probably would have committed suicide anyway. So, yes, however this was staged, suicide was the narrative from the jump. Period. Now, how it's staged, you can classify it as a murder or homicide. But suicide was the initial activity that they wanted to engage in per his request. I guarantee he wanted it. But the cover up is just making it worse. It's just muddying the waters right now. And so it's good we're hearing from his perspective. He may not know the whole detail because his brother is dead and it's a massive cover up, but at least you get to see his perspective.
Potential homicide. And when it's proven, and it will shortly be proven, that he could not have committed suicide, the way they say, well, then we need to have a full homicide-capable investigation done.
Let me stop you there, because you say
Go ahead.
he didn't commit suicide the way they said he did. What did they say he did, and why did he not commit suicide that way?
Okay, well, there's a group of pathologists who decided to take this up, and they're not doing it on my behalf. I'm not paying them. They realized that this wasn't right, and they've asked me to give them all of the medical records from the autopsy. I've given the complete file that I have, including all the photographs, and they've determined that he could not have committed suicide because of the damages on his body. And their report is being peer-reviewed and will be released. It's a very scientific paper. There's all kinds of, incidents. Like one of the first things that came out was the groove on Jeffrey's neck, which was left by whatever ligature was left around his neck. It's not the right angle. If you're hanging with your body weight on the noose, that noose rides high up under your chin, under your mandible, and goes up towards the back of your ears and behind your head.
And he's right about that, but see, here's the thing. You cannot necessarily hang yourself in a cell. They make sure you have no objects or extrusions in the ceiling or in the wall to hang yourself. So you have to find another means to have strangulation. And that's where the possibility he had help or he found another way to have it done. He could have found, means to do it himself and injured himself. Who knows? But you don't necessarily have to have a new style hanging because they make sure you can't hang anything from the ceiling. Now, his brother may not know that because, being of his status and class, he probably never saw or been close to anything related to jail in his life. He probably never paid attention to none of the movies. Because even as you watch the movies, you notice typically you don't see anybody hanging themselves in jail. And if they do, they might hang themselves from, the bed, which is not high enough. Other than that, they're either getting strangled or stabbed with something makeshift. That's it, So, granted, we gotta give him credit where credit is due and giving the man his flowers for the loss of his brother, despite the means of his end. But he's trying to give his speculation on what he feels based on what he has as evidence.
The mark on Jeffrey's neck is more in the middle of his neck. It doesn't have that high upward slope.
And I'm gonna stop him right there because, like I said, you can't hang yourself, so you have to be strangled. And when you getting strangled, guess where it's at? Right here. It's right here. It's not gonna be up here. It's gonna be right here. So he had to find a way to strangle himself and could have, tried and struggled to do it till he got it done, or he could have had help. Or several people was involved, one to help watch the door and the other one to get it done, and he was just flailing and strangling because that's like drowning. You're gonna be flailing. You're not gonna be calm. You're gonna be flailing. Period. So let's keep it moving.
In a true hanging. And they've compared Jeffrey's ligature mark to others, all kinds of reports in scientific journals. And it shows that he could not have been hanging the way they said. Because they said, we were trying to find out for 4 years what position he was in when they found him. And we weren't able to get that. And then finally, in the Justice Department report, they stated that when he was found, he was in a seated position with his legs extended in front of him. And when he was...
I don't mean to stop it there, but that is a surefire sign. Two things could have happened. He could have done it himself and started flailing, or He was sitting in a sitting position, which that's the most you can do, and someone performed it for him. So yes, it's a suicide method, but it was probably a homicide at the end of the day. But the idea was suicide. So
Cut down or torn down, that's still not sure, that his buttocks was an inch and a half off the ground. Okay, so if you can picture somebody hanging like that, and Jeffrey's size, there's about 20 pounds of weight on his feet because his feet were extended out. The rest of his body weight, and he weighed about 180 pounds, was hanging by the neck. That ligature mark should be high up on his neck.
I'm gonna stop right there and call it a night. But if you can picture how that looks, he was pulled from behind like this to strangle. If you think about that context, the only way you can get leverage to do that is the bed. So there you have it. I just wanted you guys to get an idea of what his perspective was, tied to what my perspective was. We added more details from what he thought, putting it all together. And yes, it's still being theorized and a cover up, but it does definitely debunks the conspiracy theory. Totally. We just have two perspectives now. And at the end of the day, he wanted to die. That's just point blank. Nothing out of pocket about that. He gestured it. His brothers mentioned it. He just wanted to go. He didn't want to go through no more of that trial and sitting in jail and being poked and prodded. So I will talk to you guys later on the next reaction video.